Welcome back this morning. We are ready for our first talk of the day. Major George Filer, who retired from the Air Force, had some incredible experiences there, and then has continued on as a UFO investigator, and he has a very popular weekly web journal that he sends out called Filer's Files. So he's going to share all of this with us. Help me welcome George Filer.
Good morning. A wonderful group of people being able to get up this early in the morning and come out. I think you're very important people, that there's a few people on the earth that really know about UFOs, and hopefully you're going to learn a lot more this morning. I spent 20 years in the Air Force and learned a lot about UFOs in the Air Force, but I also saw my first UFO when I was only 4 years old. I lived in Maywood, Illinois, and lived in this particular apartment building, which had a nice big window to overlook a park across the street. There I am at 4 years old. And I would look out towards the park, and the signal for us that when the UFOs were coming, where that we'd see a bunch of birds or bees kind of massing together and make something like this. And I looked out over the park. Our house is right at the bottom there, over the park, and we could see the kids playing in the park and so on, and every so often these objects would mass and land in the park. And I saw this rather frequently. And when I went to kindergarten, I don't know if in your kindergarten they had this, but they had like a show and tell. And the kids would stand up and show their teddy bear and so on. And I'd say, well, I'm watching the spacemen come and land in the park. Well, the kids were very excited about this, and they would push these kids with the teddy bears off the stage and ask me to come up and speak about what I was seeing. And I could see the UFOs land and the aliens get out. They had black uniforms on and looked pretty much like you and I, the ones at least that I could see from the park. And then they'd fly away. So I knew that something was going on from a very little child. And as I got older, I visited Florida with a friend, and it happened that his father was a German who had came from Germany just before World II, but a good friend of his was a German rocket scientist. And we all got together in Treasure Island in Florida, and this rocket scientist is telling about the UFOs, that they would go out walking in the hills, in the mountains near Los Alamos, and they would see the UFOs. And they actually saw little green men, so to speak. And I would tell them about my sightings as a child, and they would tell them about their sightings at the present time. Well, I joined the Air Force after finishing college at Bradley University, and people every so often would talk about UFOs. I was entering flight training. It was at James Connolly Air Force Base in Texas. And one day, while in flight training, they asked me to go to 12th Air Force and become a courier and take information over to 12th Air Force in Waco, Texas. So I took this secret information over there and gave it to this fellow sitting there and said, what do you do, Lieutenant? And he said, well, my job is to take care of the UFOs that land at Gray Army Airfield, Fort Hood. I said, UFOs? He said, oh yes, we have some UFOs that we handle and take care of supplies and go to Army Airfield. Now, I didn't know if that was true, but apparently the United States Air Force at one time at least had its own UFOs, apparently based on the crash at Roswell, and some indications that there was even crashes before that they had picked up craft as well. My first assignment was in Athens, Greece, and where I flew, and interestingly, since I had a business degree, they made me head of the officers club and the Class 6 store, as well as doing my flight duties. And Athens is a beautiful place, which I enjoyed being stationed there. But my commander was a Captain Ramage, and he was telling me about his experiences in the Korean War, that he was flying B-25s there, and that as they're going on their mission, they look off to the right, and there's a UFO flying in formation with them. And this UFO started doing rolls around their B-25. And my next assignment was in England to Sculthorpe Air Force Base, which is north of London. And there I was flying tankers. Here I am in uniform. And one day we're up there, and we had been warned that the RAF had generally intercepted the UFOs, but there was some kind of trouble with the fighters. They didn't come back, and that they were going to try sending other aircraft that were unarmed after the UFOs, and that would be one of our duties. In any case, one night we were up over the North Sea refueling fighters, and we got a call, would we intercept a bogey over the central part of England? And so we said, sure. We just finished our refueling mission, and the fighters had, and the fog was rolling in, and the fighters would go on to Spain or Germany with our fuel. In any case, London Control radar was picking up this large radar return over the Oxford Stonehenge area, and we were given intercept to go towards it. We were up on the North Sea, which you can see by this circle there, doing this boring holes, so to speak, in the sky during the tanker mission, and we had to fly down to the southern part of England, where Stonehenge is, just about the center part of England. And as we're diving down, we got excited and went faster than the aircraft was supposed to go. We passed the red line and had to pull back on the power. But in any case, we turned on our radars, and we picked up this huge radar return. I don't know if you're familiar with radar or not, but you can pretty much tell what's out ahead of you. And when you took off from base in England, one of the biggest radar returns was this bridge in North Scotland called the Firth of Forth Bridge. It was a big steel bridge about a mile long. And I was used to seeing it, you might say, every day that we flew. It was a return that we knew was always there and we could always see. This is, as you can see, a huge steel bridge with a beautiful radar return. Well, the interesting thing was that this radar return, or almost the exact same return, was over the center of England, over Stonehenge, just hovering there. And based on the radar return, it was an object about a mile long and looked something like this. As we got closer, it was at night, so all we could really see was lights on this object, but it looked very much like a cruise ship at sea with, dozens of lights off in the distance. And we're doing about 425, and about a mile away from it, it went straight up into space. And London Control said that we could continue on our mission, and this is something like what it looked like. A huge object was now up in space, and we're going on our mission. But that obviously convinced me that UFOs are real, and I think most of the people here believe that UFOs are real and that they're visiting us on a regular basis. But even though we had seen them on many occasions, there's still this doubt in your mind, do they really exist? Well, I was invited to a dining in, and this speaker, just like I'm speaking today, was Prince Philip, the husband of the Queen of England. And after his speech, he sat down and he said, I want to talk to the air crews that have chased UFOs. So about 10 of us sat down with Prince Philip and had some cigars and dessert, and each one of us explained their sighting, pretty much like what I'm doing today. And I asked Prince Philip why he believed in UFOs, and he said that he personally had not seen one, but he had become interested in them because of his uncle, Earl Mountbatten, had seen them up close in India, and he believed his uncle. And I believed Prince Philip. So that was my, somebody of his stature, of course, makes you believe. And then, of course, at the same time, they were picking up UFOs flying around England. This what happened. One happens to be at an air show at Goodwin in Sussex. I was then transferred to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, Hampton, Virginia, shown here, and Tactical Air Command. And while I was there, I was flying tankers, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on, and I was refueling our F-101s going into Cuba, taking some of these pictures and coming out. Well, having been in England, as I had obtained a top-secret clearance, and they were looking around for top-secret couriers, and during the middle of the crisis, they pulled me on a flying aircraft, made me a courier, and my job was to go between Tactical Air Command headquarters and General Sweeney to the headquarters in Washington, D.C., and meet with General LeMay. And they would give me information to tell each one of the generals. For example, General LeMay told me that if any aircraft of ours are shot down, that we're going in to attack the SAM sites in Cuba. And then I'm to tell that to General Sweeney, which I did. So we had, at that time, all the fighters in the Air Force, and we were getting ready to attack. Well, a U-2 was shot down in Cuba by a SAM missile site, Soviet missile site, and TAC was ready to attack, and at the last minute, President Kennedy stopped the attack, which was probably, in retrospect, a good thing. Interestingly enough, what was brought up, our intercepts were picking up the fact that the Cubans were picking up UFOs, and our air crews were reporting UFOs. So the Air Force does take them seriously. Now, one interesting thing is that at Langley Air Force Base, we had F-106 fighters, and a couple F-106s were sent to Misawa, Japan. And a fellow that I played bridge with all the time, an F-106 pilot, had heard through his people that an F-106 had been destroyed in Japan. And he said what the story was is two F-106s were launched when the radar picked up UFOs near Misawa, and one of the two F-106s had engine problems and returned to Misawa, but the second one went on towards the UFO and was given orders to fire its missile at the UFO. And the pilots are listening, to this over the radio, and they're saying he's made a direct hit on the UFO, and it's coming at us. Even though it had a direct hit, apparently it didn't bother it, and was coming towards the F-106, and he starts yelling, and in any case, he never returned. And other aircraft were sent out to find the 106 pilot, and some of them didn't come back. But there's strong indications through that and other stories that I've heard that we've lost quite a few aircraft attempting to attack UFOs. Also, the RAF has lost aircraft attempting to attack UFOs. So it's not a good idea. This is, it's almost like they seem to turn our missiles against us, that kind of thing. On the other hand, I've never heard of a situation where they've actually attacked our planes unless they were attacked. In other words, it's a defensive operation. Now, I was at Langley Air Force Base, and every day I drove through the NASA side of the base. And this is when the Apollo program was going on, and we were sending satellites to the moon. And some of our intelligence people would go to NASA and help them with their image interpretation and so on. And the story started getting around is that they were picking up alien bases on the moon. And these are some of the most likely situations that they found that are on the far side of the moon that appear to be actual bases. And we started checking into what they were doing, and it appears that they were doing mining on the moon. And they have all kinds of various objects, triangle-shaped objects, UFOs like this. I talked to this about Edgar Mitchell, sixth man who walked on the moon. And he told me, well, we have to sign an agreement not to tell anything about what we've seen on the moon and, whether we've ever seen UFOs or anything. He said, now, personally, I didn't see anything, but all my friends did. And he went into rather, detail of the kind of things that his friends had seen, and apparently they had seen some of these kind of structures on the moon. And Edgar is starting to talk about it if you listen to him. Now, at Tactical Air Command Headquarters, we had different duties, and one of my duties was to work for the Navy. Tactical Air Command is also Air Force Atlantic, in other words, being the Air Force for the Navy in the Atlantic area. And I would go over to Norfolk, Virginia, to the Atlantic Command Headquarters and play exercises and be in their command post and brief Admiral Moore and so on, who later became one of the chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Well, one day when I was over there, they said everybody has to leave the command post. There's like 50 people on the command post. And, we're in the middle of an exercise and everybody has to leave. And the only persons that were left were Admiral Moore, the head of the command post, which was a captain, and a media specialist, a fellow that took care of the photos and the movies like we have people right behind here. There's a whole group of people behind me. And I don't know if you know that. But in any case, after a couple hours, we were allowed back in the command post, And because I was a briefer like this, I knew the media people, specialists pretty well, and I said, what was going on? And he said, well, they had picked up a UFO over the Atlantic. And when they have the UFOs, they clear the command post, and only a couple people designated by Admiral Moore are allowed to know about what's going on. And I said, well, naturally, I'm asking him what happened, and he said, well, the first thing Admiral Moore did is, check on where all the carriers were, and they started launching aircraft to try to intercept this UFO. And one interesting comment that Admiral Moore made was that, is this operation with the Soviets, or are we doing it alone? And the answer was this particular intercept was our own, not with the Soviets. The point is that this is like, 1966, and that we were already working with the Soviets concerning UFOs. And as I understand, a large UFO was seen moving across the Atlantic, and the fighters were launched, and they actually got excellent video and photos of the UFO, which were sent to Norfolk, and this gentleman had put on the screen so that Admiral Moore could see them. And he said they were really great pictures. Now, I was transferred to Vietnam in 1968. Actually, I was supposed to fly F-4s, and they transferred me to 7th Air Force headquarters to be a briefer for the generals. And my boss was General George S. Brown, who also later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So if anyone wants to become chairman, good chance if I become your briefer that you get promoted. I don't know why that worked out, but it did work out several times. But in any case, we used to brief about the fact that UFOs were flying over, particularly the north, the DMZ, and were being picked up by our aircraft and so on, and also out at sea. And in General George Brown's biography, he mentions that. And this is part of the statement in the book. They weren't called UFOs, but they were seen up around the DMZ early in the summer of 1968. The point is that even at the highest level, there is admittance that they do exist. This is kind of an interesting photograph. It was given to me by Commander Graham Bethune of a UFO, that picture he had taken. After my year in Vietnam, 7th Air Force, I was transferred to Scott Air Force Base to Military Airlift Command. And almost every morning, I would be standing up in front of the generals at 8 o'clock in the morning, giving the day's reports on what's going on. Well, fairly regularly, our air crews would report that they had seen UFOs, and just like I put out in Filer's files, the air crew saw this, UFO at 25,000 feet and flew around them or whatever, was pretty much the kind of reports that were briefed. I would say about once every 2 months we would have a briefing, but more often than that, the crews were seeing them, and we would just tell the general about the more important ones. And this is what the MAC command post looked like, and it had a bunch of screens like this, and my job, in a sense, was to keep the screens filled, and congressmen and different important people would come in, and we would brief them as well as the generals every day. And when you have 4 or 5 screens, it's tough to keep them filled with pretty pictures and everything. So I was sent to the Pentagon basically to get more pretty pictures. When I say pretty pictures, the things like Soviet T-72 tanks, which were the newest tanks that they had just discovered traveling across East Germany, and somebody had taken a picture of the tanks on the railroad cars. And the latest SAM sites and the latest Soviet aircraft, and whatever our spies and our intelligence and our U-2s could pick up, we would get these large number of slides. I picked up like 1,000 slides, mostly all classified. Well, since I was briefing about UFOs every so often, I said, could I have some UFO slides? And they said, well, we have a whole vault full of slides and video and gun camera film and so on, but you can't have any. And I said, well, I brief General Canton every day, and I've got above top secret clearance, et cetera. They said, no, you can't have any. Said the only way that I could have any slides of top secret UFOs was if I got a letter from General Canton, who's a unified commander, to appoint me specifically as being able to see that data. Now, it happens that my boss had that clearance, but they never gave it to me. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I'm upset that they never gave me the clearance. True story. That's my wife and I. I have a beautiful wife. It reminds me of the first alien I ever saw. But I was transferred from Scott Air Force Base after 4 years to McGuire to fly some more, and also became a briefer there at 21st Air Force headquarters. And one of the first things that I briefed about was the Tehran, Iran sighting. I don't know if most of you have probably heard about it, but you may not have seen some of the pictures involved. And this intense, brilliant light was seen not far from Tehran, just north of the city, and hundreds of people were seeing it and calling the Air Force and saying, in fact, do you see the UFO out there? So they launched a couple F-4s after the, which interestingly enough were our aircraft built in the United States, but Iran had them at the time. And Lieutenant Perazi, the F-4 went to see the UFO first, and this is his drawing of what the UFO looked like that was over Tehran. Kind of a blue cylinder with kind of a disc in the background, but it was a huge object, estimated, almost a mile in size, and very bright and could be seen for miles, and caused a lot of electromagnetic effects in his aircraft so that his compasses and so on didn't work correctly. And he turns around and lands. And the second aircraft, second F-4, went up and had its weapon system armed and was going to go after the UFO. And a object came out of the main UFO toward them, which kind of scared him. And this is a picture that he got of that. And he tries to launch his Sidewinder missiles at the UFO, and they didn't operate. His weapon system was shut down, yet other, his engines and so on would work, and he turned around and landed. And he recently was part of the Disclosure Project, and now General Parvez he was a lieutenant at the time, but now he's a general, and told about his story. And this was interestingly, I remember the document, it was a confidential document, and it was a report on the sighting. Another kind of report that we would get was the satellite data. And our satellites are picking up UFOs as well that are coming in from space and landing somewhere in the United States or around the world. And sometimes they pick those UFOs going from the ground up into space. And these are being tracked on a regular basis. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but Lockheed has just been given a new contract for the space fence that we're now going to be building. Now, I'm not sure what that fence is going to do, but obviously, they say that it's going to track all the objects moving around in space, that there's not enough ability to track even small objects like that the shuttles would run into and so on. But I have a hunch it's also going to track UFOs. As a matter of fact, one of the design engineers for the space fence at Lockheed happens to go to church with me, and I'm giving him the information of how best to pick up UFOs. In any case, they exist, and they're out there, and they're doing things. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but at McGuire Air Force Base is actually a combination of 3 bases. It's the only base in the country, I understand, that's composed of Army, Navy, and Air Force. Fort Dix is there, and Lakehurst. And it pretty much takes up the whole central part of New Jersey. And in 1978, an incident happened that is important for you to know about at Fort Dix, where they did Army training at the time, and also at Lakehurst Naval Air Station, which is part of this huge base, is what most people remember is famous for the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg blew up and crashed there in 1937. But other important things happened at the base. We used to have Bomark missiles there. And the Bomark missiles were designed with nuclear warheads, and the idea was when the Soviets would attack us, we would shoot off these Bomark missiles, and when they get near a Soviet bomber, they'd explode, this nuclear explosion, and knock down the Soviet bombers. Well, fortunately, that never actually happened, but what did happen is one of them blew up in June 7th, 1960, and this is partially a nuclear explosion, which is in the center of New Jersey, which is not, the nuclear weapon didn't explode, but the radiation came about and caused a lot of problems. And this is what it looks like today. The base is obviously closed, that part of the base. And they feel that there may be some leakage into the water of this radiation. Well, back at McGuire, the UFOs are being picked up by the radar, and one moves into Fort Dix area and lands, and there's some question exactly how the alien got out, but an alien got out, and the military police, the Army, came along and spotted him and told him to stop, to arrest him and so on. And I don't know if the alien doesn't speak English or whatever, but he does. In any case, he refused to stop, so the Army MP shot him. Well, when the alien gets shot, he apparently doesn't like it, so he starts running. Well, they alerted all the military police on the base. They alerted the state police. Right next to Fort Dix is McGuire Air Force Base. They alerted the McGuire security police. And not only did the policeman shoot the alien, he also shot at the UFO. And that's about all he'll say. I never actually talked to him, but there was a big search going on with dozens of people out there looking for him in this general area of the base. And I pick up the story when I talk to a security policeman, Jim Morris, who said that he's on the McGuire side of the base, and he could see all these lights of these people searching for the alien on the Fort Dix side. Well, he's on the McGuire side. And as the Army searches, they're kind of like pushing the alien towards the McGuire Air Force Base, and the UFOs are buzzing the base. They're very angry. They're flying right down the runway at a few hundred feet and so on, and dozens of people are seeing them. And this security policeman from the Air Force with a state policeman find the alien on the end of the runway, who's apparently now deceased or just about. And interestingly, a couple of things started to happen. Within an hour, on something like 45 minutes, a whole group of men dressed in black arrive. And they take over the perimeter guard from this Sergeant Morris. And they treat him rather nastily, actually. Take off, Sonny, you did what you're supposed to, or whatever. But in any case, they belittled him, and he felt bad about it. And then almost immediately, a C-141 lands, and it's from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And what nobody can quite figure out is how did Air Force know so quickly that this alien was shot and that he was, needed to be picked up, and this group come in and guard him and so on. It's part of the question of, what did the Air Force really know? Did they know that this craft was landing or whatever? But in any case, the story goes, by the way, I flew these C-141s and have a couple thousand hours in them. C-141 takes off and goes to Wright-Patterson. Well, that morning, I'm coming to on the base at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I go through checkpoint to get on base, and they give you a hard time coming on, make sure who you are, et cetera. And I drove on base, and I could see a bunch of red lights out on the end of the runway, and I thought that perhaps there was an aircraft accident. In any case, I worked in this cement block building in the command post. And when I got in the command post, the commander of the command post came up to me and told me that UFOs were in the pattern around the base, and that this alien had been shot. And I thought it was an alien from another country. And they said, no, it's not from any other country, it's an alien from space. And I said, and we want you to brief General Sadler at the 8 o'clock briefing about this alien. And I said, can we have him here? General Sadler doesn't have a very good sense of humor. So I got on the phone and I started calling around the base, radar and 438th Wing Command Post and to the Air Police and so on. But in any case, and the tower, and they all confirmed pretty much what I just told you, that UFOs were buzzing in the base, and that they seemed to be angry at us, and that this alien had been found on the end of the base, and that C-141 from Wright-Patterson had come in to pick it up, and our aircraft in the air were seeing the 141, were seeing the UFOs. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you're familiar with radio traffic, but I've talked to pilots who were in Germany at the time, and they could pick up the traffic about all these reports going on between the planes and the towers talking to each other. Now, this shows McGuire from the air, and I don't know if you can see in the lower right-hand corner is where the alien was found. And up above that to the right is a large white area, which is like a huge ramp. And even though I used to fly into McGuire all the time, I never really noticed that field. And as the UFOs are flying around, they seemed very angry and appeared like they wanted to pick up their buddy, you know, kind of like the Marines. You grab anybody who dies and take him away. Well, this is General Sadler, and just before I briefed General Sadler, they said, don't brief the information to there's like 50 people in the command post. Don't brief it out loud to everybody. That we'll handle briefing him. And again, some of the UFOs, these are the depictions based on what Commander Bethune had given me. Now, after my briefing, which was then pretty much a standard briefing, I went over to the photo lab, and I would go over there again for all these pretty pictures every day. And when I got over there, they told me that they had some, you know, wonderful pictures. When I look at them, I had the object in my hand, started to open it, and the sergeant came up and grabbed the envelope away from me, and he said he can't see that. Well, what I believe was in those pictures was the actual photos of the alien, but I can't prove it, but that's my indication of what it was. Now, interestingly enough, almost immediately after all this happened, I don't know if the aliens can do this, but we had a huge snowstorm. And the rumor was at that point that a UFO had crashed. And I went around the base with my camera, which I always had, and this fellow was guarding this large pile of snow. So I don't know if that snow had anything under it or not, but I thought it was interesting that somebody would guard a pile of snow. Well, part of what happened then is the security policemen who had seen the UFO and the alien were taken to Wright-Patterson. And aboard the plane, their commander essentially threatened them not to tell anybody about any of this story. And they were all transferred to various places around the world. That Sergeant Morris, for example, was transferred to Okinawa. And those of us who were near retirement were retired. Those who, point is that anybody who knows anything about UFOs and a particular incident is spread apart. They don't shoot you, they just send you off to some other place, you know, so that you can't talk about it. Because there's something about if you see a UFO or alien, can you really believe that? I'm sure all of you here have a question in your mind, do they really exist? So if you're don't have the opportunity to talk to one another, you just assume that, well, it was a case of mistaken identity or whatever. Well, I went to this is the headquarters for the military police. And after I retired, I said, this story is kind of bugging me. I want to find out what happened. So I went to the military police people, and they're very friendly and so on. But they said, we don't know anything about that. Let's look at our records, see if there's anything in the records. Well, there was nothing in the records to indicate that an alien had been shot on the base. But it did say that a team from Washington, D.C. had come in that day and conducted an exercise, and that a cleanup operation was conducted. And the security police were part of this cleanup operation. And this is the area where allegedly the UFO came down and the alien was shot. But this is very close to this other area I'll show you in a minute. But some kind of cleanup operation went on, and they closed a road on Fort Dix, indicating that possibly a UFO or part of it was there that they were cleaning up. This is allegedly what the alien looked like, more or less a typical gray. And this is the fence that he supposedly went through. On the right is Fort Dix, on the left is McGuire. And right near there is this huge ramp where a UFO could nicely land. Somebody here? Any case, and this ramp has these huge floodlights. So for some reason, the Army has this area that they can land, possibly for helicopters. This is the same place seen from the air. The white part is the ramp where the UFO allegedly crashed, and the fence line here where he crossed over to the end of the runway and died. It's kind of interesting that aliens like the Air Force better than the Army. This is a picture taken from that ramp to show you how close they are, and probably the area that he moved through. And this is a shot from the end of the runway. Now, part of my investigation, I became the state director of the Air Force Association. I found that if I went and talked to military people and I said I'm with the Air Force Association, they talk to me very nicely. If I walk in and say, I'm with MUFON, I'm a UFO buff, they don't want to talk to me. So I found that by having, well, I'm the president of the Air Force Association, then they talk to you. Wing commanders, congressmen, and all the rest of it. But through that, I've talked to General Young, who was the commander of the National Guard at the time, and then owned that one area of the base, and he said he knew nothing about this. And I was very depressed, and I drove home, and I passed through this little town of Tabernacle, and stopped in the local antique shop, and I asked them, do you happen to have any, models of UFOs or anything? And they said, no. They said, I'm trying to find out about the alien at Fort Dix. And they said, well, I don't know anything about the alien at Fort Dix, but I used to go and see the aliens at Wright-Patterson. I said, hey. I said, are you serious? And his wife comes in, he says, oh yes, I used to be a typist at Wright-Patterson, and we used to write up stories about the aliens and extraterrestrials and so on all the time. And he said he was in OSI, Office of Special Investigations, which is like the police force, the detectives in the military. And then his friend called him and said, like 3 o'clock in the morning, wakes him up and said, come over to the hangar 18F, actually not a hangar, but building 18F, and I've got something to show you. And he's like, what? He said, well, it's well worthwhile for you to come over. Well, in any case, he goes over in the middle of the night to this building, and he's let in through the entrance here, and comes in, and he's shown an alien. Now, the alien he saw looked pretty much like you and I. And this alien is from the movie Hangar 18. And I encourage you to get that movie. Hangar 18. It's available. And according to the producer of the movie, they were helped producing the movie by the government so that we would understand about UFOs. In other words, in a way, they want us to know, but they want the deniability factor. And this is the UFO in the movie, but it's similar to the one that he saw at Wright-Patterson. And I said, well, I'm going to Wright-Patterson in a couple weeks. I could stop in there. And he gave me directions of how I should go to find, the UFO to look at. So I go to Wright-Patterson, and I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's worthwhile going because there's a big Air Force museum with just about all the aircraft that the U.S. has ever had in this museum. And another part of the base, they have the Wright brothers monument. And in a third part of the base that they still don't let you go in is where they keep the UFOs, at least some of them. And you drive around the base, on the hangars, you can see the Wright brothers. And looking for the UFO on the base, driving all over. And one of the things they have there is the Foreign Technology Division, where when we capture like Soviet aircraft, they bring it there and take it apart and so on. When they get Russian satellites, they bring them in and take them apart and so on. So this seemed like the right place. And he said, you go in the main gate there and go up the hill until you get to the propulsion rotor test facility. And that in that rotor test facility, the UFO was tested. And they hang it from the top, so to speak. And that right next to it is the building 18F, where they kept the UFO. So I checked into it, and this building was built in record time, in a month or so. And if you know anything about the Air Force, it takes years for anything to happen. To build something in a month, it means that it was very important. Well, in any case, they said the key to it is that the building where the UFO is, it has an entrance to it that's large enough for the UFO to fit into. Well, we found this building, which you can see my wife's car there is like 20 feet long, and the entrance is 40 feet or more, and that's where the UFO was. So I walk inside the building and start taking pictures. And there's no UFO. Now this is a model of one that was captured and allegedly was in there, but I didn't see any UFO. So I started checking around. Well, where's the UFO? Well, I found 4 people so far that say the UFO, I don't know if you can tell here, but behind this laser aircraft, there's a runway that goes up the hill. And under that runway, allegedly, is where they keep the UFOs. But they wouldn't let me in to see. But I wrote a book about it that you can get outside. And my real reason to being here is to spread the word, so to speak, that UFOs are real. They're here. Some of them are friendly, and some are not so friendly. Like any organization, I think they have their interests at heart. In other words, if they need some gold, they'll go dig up some gold under the ocean or whatever and take it away. If they need some water, they'll take it. But generally speaking, they don't do as much harm. For some reason, those in South America seem to be nastier and do, in effect, sometimes hurt people. They do apparently abduct people here. How how many are abductees? But in any case, they're here, and I feel that part of the reason that you are here is the fact that it's important that the world know about this. And I write something called Filer's Files. Do any of you people get the files? Quite a few of them. Everyone's more than happy for me to send them to you. Just send me your email, and I'm glad to send it to you. Just majorstar@verizon.net, and it's free. But if you win the lottery, I expect you to remember me. And I encourage you all to play the lottery. Well, one thing is, I think I send the files now to about 7,500 people, and each person sends it to 20 other people, and those 20 send it to 20 others. We can have a revolution like they had in Egypt. That almost everybody in the world will know about UFOs. And another thing is, I invite you to send me your sightings and send me what you think. We're all kind of searching this together. Some of us have seen them, some have not, but we believe in them, we learn about them. And you're a very clever and smart group to be here. When you think about it, there's very few people that really know about this. You know more now than most of the people on Earth, probably than 99.9% of the Air Force. I do send it to about 1,000 Air Force officers, and they send it on to other people because they want to know about it too. They're not told about it in the service. But you know the secrets, like Michael Schroff, I don't know if you watched his briefing yesterday, he talked about J-Rod and S4, and information is starting to come out. I've been encouraged to provide this information so the government has this ability to deny it, so to speak, but at the same time that you can learn about it. And that's part of why we have V on television. People watching V? Well, and we have to learn more about our visitors. We are part of a universe, and you're part of this leading group that's going to tell the rest of the world about UFOs. That's all I have, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
There's a question microphone right here for anybody who has questions.
I'm very curious why. Now, I'm not a debunker, and I firmly believe in everything,
Sure.
UFOs, everything. I actually believe that we were put here 4 million years ago, but that's a theory, and it's another whole subject. But why on Earth would an alien drop his spacecraft and leave the craft? I'm just curious on that. Unless he was defecting, maybe, I don't know. But to me, or maybe he had to go to the bathroom. But why would an intelligent being like that do such a stupid, something so ridiculous?
I can only tell you
What happened?
what I understood happened. Now, you know, we may have holes in the story or whatever.
Right. But to me, it just seemed very
We
strange.
I get many reports of people seeing the aliens around the craft doing various things, picking
Yeah.
up people or whatever, and they may, you know, in an emergency situation, leave them.
Right. Well, thank you.
At the beginning of your presentation, there were a number of what looked like good pictures of UFOs. Now, are those real pictures or are those constructed computer
Well,
pictures?
they were given All I can tell you for certain is they're given to me by a commander in the Navy, Bethune, Graham Bethune, and he told me that they were real as a gentleman and, you know, naval officer. I didn't see him take the pictures or anything.
So
But he claimed that they were real.
he claimed that they're real. That's the problem. Pictures can be duplicated and
Well,
stuff on the computer.
there's no question about it. Pictures can be faked and so on. But the question, in a way that really doesn't matter. What matters is that we're being visited and they are here. And if you got $1 million, you can make the best pictures in the world, you know. You can make a movie about it. Hi.
George, in the Tehran case, 79, you showed what appeared to be gun camera pictures from the 2 F-4 pilots that approached the big UFO. Am I correct in seeing those as
most of the pictures I have used were from him.
You said that the Pentagon wouldn't give you those pictures. How did you get those 2 pictures? Because I hadn't seen those before.
Well, he through the years has been my best source for the best pictures, and also other people send me photos. I assume they're real. They may not be. You know.
Right. Concerning the previous gentleman's question, I got Graham Bethune's book describing all those pictures, and
Right.
Graham, when he retired from the Navy, was in a business to put businesses' records on microfiche.
Right.
They were working with Kodak and with the best film Kodak could produce. And his business partner was communicating somehow with unseen beings and was directed to have this film in a camera with a certain grading over it. Described how to put the filter on it. And he and his wife were driving the perimeter road, what was that, 89 maybe? Nashville, Tennessee, and they saw this thing, and his wife said it was like he was in a trance. He stopped the car, and he got out, and he got the camera out of the trunk, and he set it up on a tripod and started taking pictures of this thing. Other cars were stopping, but they were seeing something blurry. And the grading that he had over it allowed him to get those really clear pictures. It was kind of neat.
Thank you, Don. Yes.
Thank you for your sharing with us today. What's being done to assist people's attitude? It's one thing to be able to show and to prove and to say they actually exist. Are there plans now for, there's some processing that needs to take place so that we can develop an attitude to come into a relationship? That's my question.
Well, to my knowledge, we're not shooting him down anymore.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes we're afraid of things, you know, but let's put it that, to my knowledge, we're no longer shooting him down, but
Right.
we're being prepared in case we have to.
Well, that preparation is certainly letting people know that things are really
Right.
have happened and are real. But is there some foresight as to where do we go from here?
Well, I happened to talk to my congressman, and I said, well, you know, what do you know about UFOs? He's been 20 years on the Armed Services Committee, Jim Saxon, recently retired because he had cancer. But in any case, he said that they don't really tell Congress much of anything about UFOs. And I have a friend who's a 3-star general, and he didn't know anything about UFOs. The point being is that most of the world, and certainly the news media and stuff, doesn't know much about it. We happen to be interested, so we know a lot about it. And once you start looking at the data, you start becoming a believer, so to speak. Well, I'm encouraging people to use the, Twitter and Facebook and that kind of thing.
Well, it's
Because
clear.
almost everybody has a computer now, and you
Yeah.
get that information out to them.
It's clear that there is a lot more information that I have noted in the last 15 years.
Right.
The next stage in all of this is how that we can begin to prepare the people in some kind of philosophical, some kind of a spiritual way to deal with this.
Well, I happen to be a Christian, but I think there's indications in the Bible and so on that we've been visited for thousands of years. And the Vatican recently has started revealing that they know things. And I think it's going to be kind of like, any case, when I talked to Saxon, he said, you're not going to get a congressman to reveal something like this. It would take 4 or 5 at least to stand up to reveal anything. And as far as the president is concerned, he'd probably need the heads of, 3 or 4 nations to stand up because of the ridicule factor. But I've found that, particularly like when you think about Egypt, people from the bottom up have made things true and changed the government there. And that I think we as a group, even this group sitting here, can change things. If we say, in effect, we believe in UFOs, they're here, you should investigate them, some money should be put towards that. You tell your friends and neighbors and relatives and so on. I'll admit you have to kind of stand up, but it's time to do it.
Thank you so much. And when we're ready to go to the next stage, let me know.
Right.
Good morning, Major
Well,
Frau.
I'm not sure I want to make a religion out of it, but
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions. Officially, what is the Air Force's policy internally with regard to UFOs as far as people at the Air Force Academy, pilots, people going through basic training? What, if anything, are they told about UFOs?
well, they used to teach it at the Air Force Academy.
What do they do now?
And they don't, to my knowledge, teach it any longer.
What do they tell pilots in basic flight school?
Basically, they say, we've got a bogey at 2 o'clock, turn your aircraft to a different heading, we'll say 49, away from it. Generally, they'll turn you away from it. Occasionally, they'll have somebody go after it.
But you don't get any training before you have it.
No.
Okay, secondly, what do you think the most effective strategy can be to have the government disclose the truth about UFOs? If any.
At least in my opinion, is from the bottom up. In other words, the public will encourage them to do it.
Do you think they'll do it? There's
Not
some
unless
people
they
that
have
doubt that
to.
they'll do it.
Not unless they have to. But in other words, they have to understand that there's a belief system that the public believes something. Otherwise, it's kind of like, believing in Santa Claus or something. It'd be like the president stand up and say, Santa Claus is real. Everybody said, well, I'm not going to vote for him.
How would you, what can we do to get the government to do it? Was really what I'm asking you.
I think our, contacting anybody of anyone of importance, even going to see your congressman and talking to him. And, he may not believe the first guy, but the 3rd or 4th guy, then he starts to think about it.
Thank you.
In other words, at least I believe the internet is our best way to get the word out.
Good morning.
Yes.
Through your contacts, are you able to speak on any ongoing relationships with the military, specifically U.S. Air Force, and alien presence here now? For instance, anything coming out of Nellis or Indian Springs, now Creech Air Force Base?
Yeah. Well, I think they had that secret program at S4, but 99.9% of the people in the government have no knowledge of that.
None of your contacts, you haven't spoken of anything?
You have more knowledge than probably almost anyone in the government.
Well, I've heard a lot of rumors of Nellis being, living near there, but I didn't know if you'd heard anything more specific.
I'm not
about
even sure it's...
ongoing connections there.
Very few people know about it. It's the most highly classified subject in the government,
Okay, thank you.
and it's very tightly held. Yeah.
Since you've decided to go public, have you know, like giving lectures like this, has somebody either, you know, with a military background like yourself, you know, communicated with you and, you know, kind of communicated a similar, you know, background, you know, that they had, and, you know, have you uncovered other people in the military that?
Well, I
went
get calls from people pretty much like the military, pretty much like the civilian life, that you know, the different air crews will see UFOs, or they see them on a regular basis. I was talking to a wing commander general that had, I think he has like 40 C-17s that he controls, and his air crews are seeing UFOs on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean they do much about it. I mean, you know, it's reported and sent up to higher headquarters. And I'm sure they're reading the MUFON Journal and open minds to find out what's going on.
You know, in regard to those pictures of the bases on the moon, NASA was releasing information way back in 1968, 1971, but they weren't releasing the pictures of what they had seen. It was more or less descriptions of what the astronauts had seen on the surface of the moon. They did say that they kept confidential the most controversial items that they had seen on the moon. On the pictures that you showed here on the screen, are those actual photographs of what the astronauts had seen on the moon as far back as 1968 and 71, or 69, when they first went to the moon?
Well, yes.
Those are actual
But
photographs.
a couple of them are from, what is it, Google Earth, Google Moon. In other words, if you go back and look for yourself, even on Google Moon, which you can get on the web, you can see some of that information.
And they also reported seeing pyramidal type structures, obelisks and things that we see here on Earth.
Radar or whatever.
Would you make a comment about the pyramids on Earth, some of them known to be as many as 35,000 years, built as far as 35 in the South America, in relationship to the pyramidal structures on the moon and the obelisks that they had seen on the moon? In other words, the Egyptians could not have built the obelisk on the moon, right?
Right.
So,
or on Mars, as far as it goes.
or on Mars, like the so-called controversial pyramids that are seen on Mars. So, what would you think in terms of the pyramids and the structures, the stone monoliths on Earth itself?
Well, I think it's my opinion that aliens or extraterrestrials have visited here, or in fact may live here for thousands of years, and they probably built like the pyramid and so on, at least some of the oldest pyramids at Giza. And I've been in those pyramids, and it's hard to describe, unless you're there, but these huge blocks of stone, like the size of the screen there, are fit so closely together that you can't get your credit card in between. In other words, it's very